A smart object allows you to combine multiple layers into a new layer, but instead of being a permanent effect where the data is merged, it becomes something that's editable in the future. Let me show you how to create a smart object. If you have an object with multiple adjustment layers, it's possible to merge this back down. Now, there are a few ways to do this. If I do a permanent merge, layer, and I choose merge layers or merge visible, you'll notice that it becomes flattened and editing is no longer possible. However, if I take these objects and just shift click to select the range, I can now right click and choose to convert to a smart object. Now, essentially, it appears as a merged layer, making it easier for others if this is a shared file, or to prevent accidental changes such as disabling a layer or adjusting a blending mode or an opacity change accidentally. But if I do need to make a change, I could just double click on the thumbnail of the smart object and a new document opens up. You'll notice it's PSB. This is an auxiliary Photoshop file format instead of the PSD document. It actually allows for a larger file size if needed. And that layer is the smart object. If I close it, you see it steps right back out. Now, when you step in, everything is fully changeable. So if I were to turn a layer off and modify the look of this here just slightly, when I close and save this, you'll see that it propagates and updates into the other document. So a lot of flexibility, the ability to merge, but not to do so permanently. One other benefit of using a smart object is that those merged layers can actually have filters applied, and the filters can run on the smart object. This means that in the future, you can re-edit the filter with the same flexibility as an adjustment layer, and it even unlocks other options like blending. Let me show you how this works. In this case, I already have a layer that's a smart object. If you double click and step inside, you can see that a few adjustments had been applied to this. Now, I can decide to modify this further. Perhaps I want to add a black and white adjustment, and let's just go with a nice strong contrast there on the red. And we'll blend that in the soft light mode. And I like how that really just brings out some of the details. Let's just lower the opacity slightly. All right, close and save. And what you'll see here is that when we switch back to the document itself, the smart object is going to take on that new look. Now, with the smart object layer, I have some great flexibility here. I can choose to add filters. So, for example, let's try the stylize filter for find edges. Normally, not the best results, but what's really cool about smart filters is this little blending arrow. If I double click here, all my blending modes become available. So a mode like multiply drops out those white areas, and I could lower the opacity here. And now that find edges effect does a great job of giving this a little bit more of an illustration feel and bringing out some of the details. Let's try another filter. Filter blur, radial blur. And this is typically used to create a zoom or a spin. I'm going to set this a little higher, sort of where the light would be coming through here, and adjust the amount slider and set that to best quality. There we go. And when I click OK, you see we get a pretty intense blurring effect radiating from that point. Now that's close. I just want to drop the point a little bit, so let me choose undo, and I'll invoke that filter again, blur, radial blur, and I'm just going to lower the point down a little bit. There we go. And click OK. Now, it's way too intense, but remember, you've got blending modes. So if you double click, you can change it. And I'm going to try a different blending mode here, something very gentle like soft light. And you see that that becomes a nice intensifier of color, or perhaps screen to drop out the dark areas. And now just the light is left behind. Now that's pretty intense, but what I'm going to do is just back that off to a lower intensity. There we go. And I like that feeling. And let's run that filter again, filter radial blur, for a second time. But now I'll put some of the color back in and blend it using a different mode. I'll double click on the top copy here, which is the new instance. You see that they go from bottom to top as you stack them. And let's set that into a mode like overlay or soft light. That looks good, a nice richening of the color, and I'll click OK. And now the document is done. Now you see that those smart filters there are applied to the object, the smart object. And if ever needed, you can just double click and step inside that smart object to make corrections or adjustments. And all of the filters are non-destructive, so they can be turned on or off after you open or close the document. And you can continue to adjust their blending mode until you get the results that you're satisfied with. Another cool technique with smart objects is the ability to use stacking modes. This means that several photos can be combined. Usually, it's several images that are from a locked-off tripod, allowing you to composite data together. But there are creative uses as well. Let's see how we can use stacking modes to create new composite images. Another way of working with documents and blending modes is to use a stack. This allows you to choose File, Scripts, and then load files into stack. Now you can browse and select several images. In this case, let me grab several different shots from a sunset. You can see here that these were taken at different times as the lighting conditions changed in the desert, but from a locked-off tripod. Now, when I click Open, these are loaded into the dialog box, and I can tell it to align the objects if I'm concerned about vibration. In this case, I was on a solid tripod, so I'm not. But I am going to tell it to automatically create a smart object out of all of these layers, and click OK. Now all the files are loaded into a single Photoshop document. And what you'll see here is that the layers become merged into a new smart object. It takes a moment to open up all the files, so just give it a second. There we go. Now you see everything in one layer. And from the layer menu, I can go to Smart Objects to see the smart object and go to Stack Mode. This gives me a range of options that are similar to blending modes about how all the data is combined. For example, I can choose an option like Maximum, which is going to pull all the details together and merge most of the image details into a single image. This creates a lot of ghosting, but you see all the clouds as they move through are combined. Now let's try another one. Layer, Smart Objects, Stack Mode, and let's try Mean, which is a type of averaging. In this case, the clouds are evened out, as is the lighting, and we get a nice, smooth overall effect. As we try different stack modes, each is going to give us a slightly different look. Now, these are often used for scientific purposes, but they do have some great creative options as well. And you could, of course, when this is done, take something like the blur tool here, just make a new empty layer, and then set this to sample all layers. Now, if needed, you can blur some of those details, like some of the clouds here, to smooth out this little area here while still getting interesting effects. And you see that that just put it to its own layer there as an effect. Now, which method you choose is up to you. It's ultimately an artistic decision, and these do have some other benefits, so be sure to explore them. But what you'll see here is an interesting effect how things combine. Some of these are very scientific, like summation here, which adds up image details, so you can see how they are combined and the brightness adds up. Others here, like kurtosis, create a different type of effect, and what you'll see is, again, that brighter details are combined. These are more of the scientific ones. But as you play in the middle there, what you'll notice is things like maximum, mean, median, minimum, range. All of these are quite useful for photographic options. In this case, you can see that the rocks didn't move, so they're locked down, but the sky combined. So these are a lot of fun, and be sure to experiment with them with different types of options. This can also be useful in a situation like a moving shot where you take a photo of a busy city street, fire several shots from one location, and then blend the images together, removing people or distractions. And it's a fun way to create a composited image using smart objects and specialty blending modes. Now, we've talked about smart objects, we've talked about adjustment layers. Let's use a smart object as an adjustment layer. This gives us some creative options and flexible outcomes. In this case, I'm going to take advantage of a smart object layer as an adjustment layer. And what I'm trying to do is create a little bit more pop as well as adjustment here to change the way this box of blueberries works. Now, I've already given you a starter file, and let's take a look at this from the top. What we have is the initial image. And then we have a smart object here, and if you look at it, it's the black and white adjustment layer. But using the lighten blending mode, we took advantage of that trick where we can lighten or darken different areas. By lifting up the greens and the cyans, I was able to effectively remove the color from the cartons of the blueberries while having little to no impact on the blueberries themselves, which were darkened. This is a cool way of doing spot color. Now, that was saved as a smart object itself, and what can now happen is blending that. Now, with that layer selected, I could choose the Move tool and use the keyboard shortcut of Shift+. This makes it easy to blend those together, and what I'm looking for is an option that's going to manipulate things. In this case, the darker areas are dropping down and the brighter areas are mostly left alone. So what you could see is that black and white layer blended in a mode like soft light effectively is just darkening and intensifying the blueberries. Then using a command like select color range, it's possible to limit this adjustment. Let me choose select color range and now click on the blueberries. Holding down the Shift key, I can continue to add. Now I'm going to decheck the localize color clusters option and just drag through here to select more. And by tweaking the fuzziness slider, we have a pretty good job of selecting the cartons. Now I'll check the colorize box here and I could simply roll the color of those cartons, making them a little bit darker and a little more or less saturated while refining the colors. And as you can see, a nice targeted adjustment on the layers themselves. Now, this is just one way of working, but by merging an object together as a smart object, you can use the modified copy plus blending modes to get some very interesting effects. Remember, blending modes work best when some areas have color and others don't, or there's a big change in luminosity between the zones. In this case, it was an easy way to manipulate tone and intensity of color without getting any major shift in the image itself. When a smart object is made, don't worry. It's very easy to step inside and make changes. And in fact, you can even step inside a smart object and export it as a whole new file, allowing you to save out the contents as its own Photoshop document. This means that you never really lose any of your work and you can pick up from any point in time. Let's explore the flexible options available to you. If you have a layer as a smart object, it's important to note that all the details are still contained within. You may recall that clicking on a smart object allows you to step inside. In this particular case, the smart object is a RAW file. So when I open this from Adobe Camera Raw or into Photoshop directly, I had the option with the Camera Raw dialog to open as a smart object. The benefit here is that I can continue to refine the development settings if needed. But there is a secondary benefit, and that is this. If you need to, you can choose Layer Smart Objects, and there's a whole dedicated menu, which includes the ability to not only edit the content or relink it to a new file in case you want to swap this out, but the ability to actually export the contents. What's nice about this is you can now export the raw file and save it out. This way you can hand it off to another application or work on it fresh. Another benefit, if you have used the file place command and used a linked object, is that you can force smart objects to convert all of the linked objects to embedded. Or if you need to save space and you're sure you have the original files on your disk, you can actually convert to linked. This works quite nicely and gives you flexibility. So if I choose Convert to Linked, it's going to give me the ability to save the internal object off and then link to this. This could be quite useful if this source file was used in multiple Photoshop documents. Now, I usually prefer the other way of placing something as an embedded graphic, but this way too, if you need to, you can select that object and convert it to an embedded one. So you can convert all linked objects to embedded. Just choose Embed All Linked and it will make the switch. So a lot of flexibility here over controlling how smart objects work. Just remember under the Layer menu, there is a dedicated Smart Objects menu that has several commands that you should explore. As you can see, smart objects are an important addition to your workflow. By combining them with other non-destructive technologies like adjustment layers and blending